Language has the ability to reflect and shape both individual and collective identity. It can be converted into many forms to be performed to attract specific audiences. It is important on how writers use figurative language and structure their piece as audiences can understand their message more effectively and what they're trying to convey, as it could change their perspective on culture and their own identity. Ali Cobby Eckermann is an Indigenous Australian poet who has used poetry as a way of curing the enormous grief she has suffered in her life. Eckermann uses powerful language techniques and personal anecdotes. This is important as it helps to connect deeply with readers to demonstrate her individual identity as well as collective identity. She uses specific themes throughout the poems in her book to convey not only individual identity but also collective identity. Perceptions of culture are important as it helps readers educate themselves in understanding Indigenous culture and their history, and how Eckermann and her family developed trauma and addiction from these past experiences. Eckermann wrote Umbulgari, a poem within a suite of Inside My Mother, which represents disruption of dispossession, as Umbulgari is one of the many communities that are being destroyed and removed from Aboriginals by the Western Australian government. The poem's Eyes and Trance, written by Eckermann, represents perceptions on Indigenous culture and reveal her sense of self and her identity. Brina Mohammed is a Canadian spoken word poet. His slam poetry, Kill Them With Love, represents how some people react and view his culture, judging his race and religion. He challenges the audience on how we perceive his culture and how identity is more than his skin colour and religious stereotypes. Umbulgari was a town in the Kimberley region where the Western Australian government made a decision to shut the town and bulldoze buildings to the ground. Though they did this action slowly, so people would be forced to move out as they had no services and essential stores open, including medical clinics and grocery stores. The government has argued that residents voluntarily left their homes, but in reality they had no choice. Eckermann wrote the poem Umbulgari not only to represent that town, but other towns that they have been destroyed and taken away from the Aboriginals. As empty as the promises that once held it together. This similarly suggests the emptiness of the town, without structure and depth, just as the promises that were made about providing support and allowing the Indigenous community to remain on the traditional lands. The government broke these promises as the removal of their towns. This shows them giving up on the Aboriginals and rejecting their culture and true identity. This quote is powerful and effective to a collective identity, as many people can relate to it, even if you're not Aboriginal. By saying this, I mean that many of us have people in our lives who once gave up on us, or breaking promises and neglecting our true identity. Even the wind can no longer stir movement at the playground. The metaphorical use of wind is represented the people who used to be present in the area, and also the literal choice of playground is effective as it reminds readers of the children that were removed, lost, just like Eckermann who lost her past. Eyes is one of Eckermann's poems which conveys our perspective of her culture. The motif of eyes is used throughout the poem as a representation of how we see and how we are seen, how we act and react. It also represents beliefs and individual identity. The eyes of this poem seem to imply the same consciousness of watching how we act and react, as if it would create judgment if we are not seen to act above the expectation of those who seek judgment. Which eyes will she need for today? This rhetorical question leaves the reader to wonder how the persona is feeling and what eyes she'll choose. Eyes of shame? Eyes of compassion? This quote forces readers to realize the tensions of culture, the challenge of representation in the white society that is willing to judge. Eckermann then begins listing off the way the eyes have been seen in the past. The quote, eyes of terror, provoke images of children being removed, as both Eckermann and her mother were removed, as it was the stolen generation in their time period, where most Aboriginal women were subjects of abuse and being raped. This poem is a representative of different faces or eyes Indigenous women must wear to survive difficult situations in our white society. In contrast to the poem Trance, eyes explore the masks we create ourselves internally to give specific perceptions to the world. Brina Mohammed is a Muslim poet and writer. He and his parents seeked asylum in Canada from Ethiopia. He grew up in Toronto but was heavily involved in the street life. He graduated at the top of his class and was named valedictorian before enrolling into university. In his career, he became a very successful award-winning writer, performer, activist, poet, and interpreter. His slam poetry, Kill Them With Love, is a heart-touching performance that challenges our perception on his culture, specifically, but all cultures in a wider view. I've been public enemy number one ever since I learned to kill them with love. This quote shares Muhammad's personal experience of the realization that when he respects and cares for others, he's still looked down upon, just because of his identity to them, by just his appearance. The metaphorical use of kill suggests how people react to his kindness and not accepting it, as it kills them, in a way by him challenging their perspective of his culture and individual identity. We both from Adam and Eve full. This quote is powerful as he shows evidence that everyone is originally brought up by the same ancestors. No matter what religion, skin color, heritage you are now, everyone is initially the same. The slang "fool" is used in the quote challenges racist people by making their perspective of his culture or skin color less legitimate, as we all came from the same ancestors. Through his performance, he conveys to the audience that hate doesn't drive out hate, only love can drive out hate. By judging someone because of their exposal identity gets you nowhere but creates your ignorant identity. Improve every day that rudeness is lame. Both Ali Cobby Eckermann and Boonah Muhammad's form of texts challenge our assumptions and beliefs about their culture and their own identity. By both using personal experiences and anecdotes, it creates credibility and authority, as it's their own stories, which teaches us their individual identity. Eckermann uses emotive language, which is very important in her texts because it connects deeply with readers or audiences more deeply by the dispossession of Aboriginal traditional lands and their impacts on it, and many other themes that are in her poems. By reading or watching activists and poets similar to Eckermann or Muhammad, it can shape an individual's perspective on different cultures and identities. Our responses to their texts or similar texts can shape our self-perception, as we are educated by their beliefs, and how response shows us our mindset and views on certain subjects. This is important because we learn more about our true identity.